Alright, hello there. Now let's go ahead and start carefully analyzing your entire database, beginning specifically with the preflop stage of play. If we take a look, as for open raise, everything looks great here basically. Except for the inflated SB, it's twice as high as it should be. But the main problem starts with calls from the big blind, and actually from the small blind as well. So they're too high, I'll show you now. About 3 times higher, roughly. So if we look at our big blind defense, our call is 17%. The solver suggests a raise of 4.4, but our call is 41%. Here it's 19 and here it's 44, so the closest is the button, which defends 30% for us, at 48%. So we really do not have any significant changes to make here. We are defending an almost identical range of hands against those early positions, in this specific scenario, as we are when playing against the button. From the SB as well, SB, it's the same story. The SB calls very tightly. The range is 3% from MP, 3% against the cutoff, and 3.5% against the button, 5. Everything here is overblown, and that's where the problems come from. That's the first thing. The same goes for 3 bets. If we look at preflop, 3 bets are in general more or less okay, except for the squeezing from the BB against early position. The BB squeeze against early position is 5%, which is also twice as high as it should be. That's what causes problems when we play big pots out of position. So this is essentially the single most important thing in the preflop stage that absolutely needs to be changed. This adjustment will definitely lead to some very significant and noticeable changes in your overall results. Now let's move on to... Okay, let's close this out. About single raise then. For preflop raiser out of position, the c-bet is too high. So again, what's the logic here? We don't want to build the pot out of position for our opponent. Based on the data from the solver, the frequency should be around 25%, give or take a little bit. But in actual games, most players tend to play 30 to 40%, and sometimes they even go as high as 50%. That's still a bit too much, and the c-bet fold is too low. It should be around 50. Then there's also a problem in this line, check, check, check fold on the turn. Here it's way too high, like 70 or 68%. So against this kind of opponent, you can bet pot. That will always be a profitable line, meaning using a 75% sizing or more. So people will play like that against us, and there's nothing we can do about it until we start defending against this kind of situation. So here, basically, overall, everything is about the preflop raiser in position. Here with the c-bets, everything is great for us, about 50-50 give or take. 5% is considered the norm there. Here it's a bit higher, but overall 50 is also fine. It should be okay. It should be around 40. So well, here, basically everything is normal. The biggest leak I found was in the situation of calling out of position. We have an overfold on the river of 85. That is, the river completed the flush. We fold, meaning whatever hands we have, we just let them go. In donk bets, the donk is overused here. We make block bets here and extract value. That's it. So we can't do anything when three streets are coming at us because all our any hands that can make it to showdown we send to the donk range. Then let me think. What else do we need to consider? So on the small blind, donk, donk, donk. Now, I found that on the small blind it's overused. Donk versus button. So it turns out that so I found this pop-up. It's a situation where we're on the SB against the cutoff and button. Donk 25 is the same thing. It's way overblown, almost 3 times higher than it should be. But here, we need to keep it simple on the preflop. Figure out what hands we're calling with, reduce the calls, and everything will be fine. But our biggest problem, the area where the vast majority of our money goes, is the bluff check raise on the river. That is, they're really going hard, a lot of bluffing, so basically, it's all about the check raises. At Showdown, we won 33% of the time, even though this number should be, well, for some people I don't know, 70 or 80, but 55 is considered normal. So we're bluffing a lot on the river, and because of that, we're making big mistakes, expensive mistakes. Then I found some hands, I'll need to look for them now, where I noted that on paired boards, you need to know when to stop after calling the turn. So we start bluffing on the flop, turn, and river with pot-sized bets, and over the long run, this eats away at him too. So in the caller versus opener check raise spot, I couldn't find any range for bluff check raises at all. That is, everything that exists has some equity. Bluff check raises only happened on paired boards, like in this situation, flop 2-2-10. We're check raising with complete air. We need to add hands here. This is especially true when we're sitting on the big blind and facing an open from the late positions. So here again is a paired board, and here there is a bluff. In this spot, this hand plays better as a call. And we should choose opponents against whom we do this when they have an inflated c-bet and a high fold to raise. That is, it should be a specific number. Around a c-bet of 60 plus and a fold of 50. These are the ideal opponents against whom we can do this. So next is playing against fish. Let's take a look now. Sometimes we choose to limp, and other times we make a raise instead. Apply. So playing against fish, we need to isolate with a range that matches the fish's position. With this range, we isolate from these positions. So that's basically by the range, okay? And now here's an interesting point. How we need to understand how how our hand stands against, how much equity it has against such a fish, and for that the Pro Poker Tools program will help us. First, we are going to open up the Flopzilla software. Once it is loaded, we will manually set the opponent's pre-flop raising range to specifically cover the segment from 20% all the way down to 90%. This is located within the PFR section of the tool. After that is configured, we will take a very close look at how his entire range interacts with the board, while simultaneously comparing it against our own specific hand to see where we stand in this particular situation. Looking at the board of Jack, 6, 7, and 4, we can clearly see that in this specific situation, we are currently the favorites to win the hand. Because of our strong position here, we decided that it was best to skip the standard continuation bet for now. Value bet. Now we add the turn. Ace. Let's see how we stand on the turn. On the turn, it's 58. We have that against this kind of opponent's range. Here the sizing should be bigger, so we can easily fold to his aggression, playing bet fold. So here the sizing should be 2/3, 3/4. Well, everything is clear here. Alright, a couple more hands from the same scenario. So the community cards on the board are revealed as a 6, a 2, and another 6. This particular fish has exactly 10%. If we round it up slightly, then they will be just about the same, sitting at approximately 50% overall. And our hand is an ace, a 3, and an ace. Well, now my queen, let's see here. It seems that we are all favorites after all. We place a bet, get a call. Now let's see what happens next. How we should play, how to play these hands. When a queen lands on the turn, it expands his range to include the hands he would likely continue with in this spot. To be even more precise about it, first we remove the queen and incorporate her into his overall range, while also including the 6s and the 2s. It is highly unlikely that he would choose to raise with that specific range of cards. He definitely has several full houses in his range. He has a 6 in his range, and he has various flush draws as well. We should leave him with his gut shot straight draws, especially since he is a recreational fish, and we can also add pocket kings and pocket queens to his likely holdings. Jacks, 10s, and jacks. Everything he has. So here it's not quite right. The program calculates, we place a bet. It actually does. The opening bracket. Now we add the turn. And we see how it changed on the whisper. Now it's 55 to 44. So here too there's a thin value bet plus protection against a flush draw. About half the pot, roughly. We are going to bet 75% of the pot right here, and we definitely don't fold. So if we actually input this data into the solver here, what kind of range do we think he is going to raise us with? Then I think we'll already be underdogs. And what hands can he raise us with? These hands? And fish. Usually that kind of board structure is missing. In general, the bluff raiser range, especially for such a big sizing, is everything, and we're already way behind here. Basically, this hand is probably better played through a check. He still has a flush draw, which will complete 18% of the time. And that's it. We calmly play check, and on the river, we already get and call him. If he bets, he will make bluffs. Okay, here's another giveaway. That is, this is also out of range, but okay, fine. We are in position against the fish. Board 10, 5, and 6. Please proceed to the gate now. There are 30 fish here in total. At 90, our hand, and right here is 992, all on the flop. We are the favorites. We make a c-bet. Okay. At this point, we finish our work. Much sooner than he does. He could have called us with 10s or 6s. We won't knock him out. Let's assume he would have raised them. Let him have all the 5s as 2 pairs since he's a fish. Let him call with any pair. Any flush draw. Any kind of straight draw. That has 2 to 6 potential outs. And it also includes various kings, queens, princes, and other members of the royal family. Jacks. So this is first, we systematically eliminate the brackets and the set of 5s. Then we add the turn card to the board and carefully observe the way our opponent's range of hands shifts and evolves on the turn. So even in this specific scenario here, we are actually sitting as slight underdogs as we move forward with the play. However, we continue to keep pushing forward anyway. It turns out that in approximately 75% of all check raise situations, we are forced to fold away our equity entirely. So even in this specific spot, I ultimately end up bluffing far too much. And I've noticed a lot of hands where we bluff on the river. I'll show them to you now. Oh, without any real reason. We just do it. Meaning our biggest mistakes are on the river. Everyone made contact, check, check. Everyone folded. No, here we don't have a single blocker to the flush. The fish has it in the range. They could have anything, and we're raising them. Against fish, you don't need history. And here it's the same. You can pull this off against a super aggressive fish with a low WTSD 31. That is, their WTSD should be 27 or lower, and river aggression around 40. All these situations eat up a very large part of your EV. Well, this is probably the only case where it's justified. River aggression is 48, we have blockers, but we just got unlucky here and lost for an entire street. Then I found a couple more hands like that. Now looking right here, yes, this specific hand is a clear example. So essentially, all of these types of hands played against early positions should definitely be folded. They simply can't be profitable in the long run, especially when you consider that this opponent is a standard, solid, regular player. Alright, we get an easy call here. Everything is according to the odds, but with this action, we narrow the opponent's range. That is, all the hands that could be weaker, he folds. All the hands that have more equity than us, he calls with. So, in this spot, we should simply fold, because making this kind of aggressive check raise would be a very big mistake. The most crucial and important thing to realize here is that the specific hands we could have easily dominated, he simply folds them away. And meanwhile, the other hands that actually have much more equity against us, we build the pot for them, meaning we increase the pot and they have equity. They will play better on the turn and the river when they are out of position, while we look to check raise them. These hands from early position, here in the range, everything is clear. This is all fine, but the most crucial one is the one I found. The mistakes are about understanding preflop, because no matter how skilled you are post-flop, if you play this loose against early positions, you won't be able to play these hands profitably. It's the same story from the small blind. With 3 bets out of position, I found a lot of interesting hands that are completely outside the range. King 7 4 5. Looking at this hand, we have the 9 8 7 and 5, which is a single suited holding. King 8 6 5. So you need to look at these hands and see who you're 3-betting them against. Against whom? So basically, we have a major key problem to address. It is specifically the preflop play coming from both the big blind and the small blind positions, which ultimately leads to making some very big mistakes on the river as well. That is pretty much the whole situation. That is everything for today. Thank you. I truly hope this information helps you resolve the issue you are facing. Your game and start playing with a higher EV. Now, let's take a moment to really try to figure out how we can best adjust our strategy when we are playing against regular players. We need to consider how to adapt specifically against certain types of opponents. For example, let's take a close look at this particular opponent right here. If we examine their data, we can see that their stats are currently sitting at 37 to 26. When we see numbers like these, what exactly should we be paying attention to first and foremost? Well, first of all, the very first thing we need to do is focus our full attention on their level of aggression throughout the game. Based on this, we will choose a strategy for how to adjust to him. Aggression and 3 bets. Now here it will be more illustrative. His 3-bet is basically standard. The only thing is, in the big blind against the cutoff, well, maybe it's just variance, but against us, it's 6%. So we haven't noticed any deviations here. Now let's move on to the post-flop. And here we see the general trend against fold. Against all other players it is 46%, but against us it is 25%. How do I adjust to such opponents? That is, on the turn he folds a bit more against us, 50%. Against this kind of opponent, I would choose to implement a specific strategy. Looking at all the pots he plays, his fold rate is 48%. Against us specifically, that number drops to 27. And on the turn, against us here as well, it stays at 50. On the flop, I would typically use a slightly smaller betting size. So there are two distinct strategic options we can consider. Either we keep the same betting size and reduce our overall betting frequency, or we increase the sizing, betting 2/3 or even 3/4 of the pot. And accordingly, we would do this already with the hands we are holding. Or the second option, which I prefer, is to punish opponents who don't like folding on the flop. We bet 33% on the flop, a small bet, and then on the turn we bet either pot or 80 or 3/4. Basically a big bet. So he ends up calling on the flop. You can see that and we are just about to see that play out right now in real time. What he's referring to here is what he calls with in this specific situation. That is exactly what it is going to be as we watch the hand unfold. So let us take a closer look at a caller who is playing out of position against his opponent. Okay, now that we have the setup, how do we actually look at this from a strategic perspective? All right, that is it for the initial analysis of this particular move. It'll probably be hard to figure out to find these hands and filter them. Well, yeah, the hands that he folded on the turn, we just won't see them. But it's already clear that his tendency is that he doesn't like to give up on the flop, and he tends to fold much more often on the turn. Because of this, the main adjustment we need to make against this kind of opponent when he is in position is to stay aggressive. In this specific spot, we should pay close attention to three key stats: his fold frequency, his raise frequency, and his tendency to bet when checked too. Looking at the numbers, his current bet frequency of 64% is definitely too high for this situation. The next adjustment is that here we end up checking good hands and play through check raise or check call, so these are the main adjustments against this opponent. On the preflop, we won't really make any special adjustments against him because his 3-bet here is standard. The next adjustment is that here we end up checking good hands and play through check raise or check call. So these are the main adjustments against opponents. On the pre-flop, we won't really make any special adjustments against him because his 3-bet here is standard. If his 3-bet were higher, for example, sometimes there are guys who like to 3-bet from the blinds against late positions at around, well, like here, 15 to 20%, although the standard is around 10, 9, or 11%. That's normal. If it's 15 to 20, we proceed as follows. We tighten our opening range from late positions and start 4-betting wider. We 4-bet hands like suited connectors, for example. And looking at a hand like ace-10 offsuit, even, let's take a moment to look now at exactly what the 3-bet solver says about this situation. Just give me a second while I open it up for us. So, this is a 3-bet strategy against a standard opening range. Let's take the button position as an example. We decide to open, and the hand we are holding is ace-10 offsuit. Here it goes. As you can see, the optimal 4-bet range definitely includes ace-10 offsuit in this specific spot. 8. These red marked hands are the 4-bet range. Everything else is played through a call. That is, few players actually play this way. What seems like an obvious easy call to a 3-bet in position with a hand like ace-10, or maybe some other hands like king-10, king-10 suited. These hands play well in position, but the solver 4-bets this hand because we will often get a fold, and even if we happen to get 5-bet in this spot, we are almost always going to have our 40% equity, even against a hand like pocket aces. These are exactly the kinds of strategic adjustments you need to be making in these games. Now, what else is there? I also took the time to look at a couple of the specific hands you played in 3-bet pots recently, and I would really like to draw your attention to something very important that I noticed there. Let's take a close look at the very first hand of the session. In this specific spot, we are choosing to use a significantly inflated c-bet size. Typically, the standard continuation bet in this scenario is exactly 33% of the pot. In fact, looking back at several other hands we played, I noticed you use that precise 33% sizing quite consistently. It really seemed to me that the reason you're doing this is because when you don't particularly want to continue playing the hand on later streets, you tend to default to this specific sizing. By increasing the size, you force a fold, but here the standard play is to bet 33%, and that's by increasing the size, you force a fold. So here the standard play is to bet 33%, and this is actually a very good board for us. We have an open-ended straight draw plus aces. There's no need to get creative here. Sometimes you can even play through a check since we block the straight draw. Alright, next. As for us 3-betting, I don't pay much attention to that because some hands aren't 3-bet, but that's fine. It's the same story. All of these bet sizings are simply way too high for this situation. I mean, I honestly do not know how it plays out at the 200 limits. Probably no one there will even notice the mistake. But once you move up to the 1000 limits, the good regulars will definitely start to notice your patterns. They will see that you use a specific c-bet size, and specifically with hands that really just want to find a fold, you tend to size up much larger than necessary. So if I were sitting at the table and I noticed this particular exploit, in this specific scenario, everything is basically being played correctly according to standard strategy. However, the crucial point to consider is that if we were holding a different hand in this exact spot, I have often noticed that you tend to bet 33% of the pot, or sometimes you even go for a full pot size bet, but very frequently it is that 33% sizing. This discussion is really all about the importance of properly balancing your different bet sizings across your entire range. Here is a truly great example of how to handle these situations more effectively. Let us take a look and try it out right now. Let's actually take a moment to break this down further within the solver. This specific hand is simply not a candidate for a 3-bet. Let's consider, for example, the exact situation where we find ourselves in these specific positions. Well, let's look closely at this scenario. We are on the button playing against the under the gun opener, and we are currently in position. Now the closest board texture that has been calculated for this spot is 10, 5, deuce rainbow. In this case, our actual hand is 8-6 suited, which changes how we approach the range. 5-4, check, that is, this hand is not 3-bet, so we can't calculate it. This hand is not 3-bet, but let's suppose we have a similar hand that it does 3-bet. 5-6, 7-8, I don't know. 3-bet there, 3-bet here. Let's look at the frequencies. First of all, how does the small blind play UTG versus button? Here are the frequencies. This is a check. I'll bet 50, making it a pot size bet. Wait a minute. Oh, hold on, that is actually not what I meant to do there at all. Give me just 1 second, let's go back and look at this again. So, the player in the UTG position here actually checks about 95% of the time. That is the story we are telling. This represents the overall strategy for this range. Specifically looking at our actual hand, the 5, 6, 7, and 8, we are almost always going to either check or look for another option. Alternatively, he might choose to bet half the pot. But here, in this specific situation, it turns out to be a much larger sizing of 3/4 of the total pot. If we decide to exclude the 2 hearts and look closely at how he typically plays, he usually bets with a balanced frequency of exactly 50% of the time. But if our hand, on the contrary, happens to have hearts, specifically if the hand has 2 hearts, then he is guaranteed to include this specific hand 100% into his entire betting range. So that's what the situation is. With this bet, all the hands that have little equity against us just fold. All the hands that dominate the higher flush draw, we end up in this kind of spot, and we're playing with an SPR of almost 4, which is quite a high SPR with 30%. This is a key mistake that also costs a lot of money. These hands should always be played differently, by checking. And now we are going to take a look at several additional examples of 3-bet pot hands that were played out of position. There's also an interesting point here that I found. Let's take a look. Yes, it certainly seems like it is a very easy and straightforward spot to just go ahead and shove about half of the total pot right here. We definitely have a very easy play available to us in this situation, but let us take a closer look at how the solver actually chooses to play this specific spot. We are looking at a scenario of the small blind versus the button on a board of 10, 8, and 3 with an 84 in the mix as well. Let us examine the hand more closely, where we are holding a strong suited ace, which gives us plenty of options and equity to consider as the hand progresses through the different streets of play. In a scenario where we are holding an ace and a 3, so there is no additional gut shot straight draw available, let's take a moment to observe how the hand proceeds from here. So if he has it, he prefers to. We should probably bet about half pot here, because if we go with a full pot-sized bet, especially since this player isn't a fish, but a solid reg, all the hands we heavily dominate, like those flush draws or middle pairs, will likely just fold to a pot-sized bet. So instead, let's actually put in a pot-sized bet here for value, and let's give this specific opponent, say, a typical hand. Let's just say they have a standard flush draw. Well, with aces, of course, he'll call, but basically, with a naked flush draw here, he just folds. So, you see, this is just leaking money. Here, you definitely need to squeeze value, either by playing through a check raise, but that should be against an aggressive opponent who bets missed c-bets, and that's not the case here. So half pot here, and then keep betting. With one bet, if he has an open-ended straight draw or a flush draw, if he hits, he'll pay us off completely. A pot-sized bet is not good here. So, here is the current situation. Everything seems pretty standard at this point. When we get to the river, we decide to place a bet, but it is honestly not very clear what specific range of hands we are trying to represent to our opponent. If he happens to have an ace in his hand here, well, I do not even know the right way to describe this play, but he is not exactly a total fish, though there are certainly some recreational players who play like that too. With a strong two-pair hand, we are absolutely never going to fold him out in this spot, and sometimes we cannot even find enough pressure to get him to fold a simple top pair ace. Therefore, we should just calmly play a river check, and the solver would most likely choose to check in this scenario as well. But let us take a much closer look at the solver's output here. It is small blind versus the button, the board is ace-jack 3, and our specific hand is 9-9 while he has jack-queen. So we bet the flop, got called, then the turn went check-check, and the river card is an 8. Let us see. The solver is going to always check in this position. We simply cannot represent a credible value range to him. Maybe our hand was actually better at some point, but he could also easily have something like a gut shot straight draw or a missed flush draw. A two-pair hand never folds when we take this specific line. So in the end, we just end up outplaying ourselves by overthinking the situation. Right over here, just in this spot, a value bet was missed against a fish. Let's consider the fact that since he is sitting in middle position but currently has a VPIP of 66%, we will treat the situation as small blind versus button against a very wide range of hands. Well, for the sake of this example, let's just say it was a pair of queens or maybe even pocket twos. The core point of the strategy doesn't change at all. We decided to place a bet, we got called by our opponent, and then a deuce suddenly comes out on the board, which is a bad call for us. And here is the truly key situation to remember. Not all of these spots are actually calculated through to the very end of the hand. Let's take a closer look to see which specific ones are calculated all the way up to the river. If we are dealing with an ace, it simply doesn't work for our range. So let's say the board comes out 8-5-5, another bad call for our position. This requires a much deeper level of analysis to understand the full range of possibilities. These are the cards that will be calculated through to the river. Well, let's say Fine, A3 comes. We'll swap things around a bit here. Bad call. And the river completes this scenario, and our hand is aces. So, almost always he goes all in, meaning we don't get any extra value. In this specific situation, we missed out. Alright, let's take a look at this next one. Here is another hand for us to consider. I've already taken a look at the solver, and here on the contrary, in these specific situations it actually prefers a full pot-sized bet. That way, we really force out those higher flush draws that might be lingering. If he's happened to hit 2 pair here, we still have plenty of equity to work with, so it'll be a very tough spot for him to navigate. Let's see what he decides to do. This is small blind versus the button on an ace-9-3 rainbow board. Well, if you think about it, an ace-8-2 is basically a very similar board structure in this dynamic. Looking at our hand specifically, we have several options to consider moving forward in this hand. For example, let's just say the flop comes out. Ace-8-5. In this specific situation, he decides to go for a full pot-sized bet, and as we might expect given the range dynamics, that pot bet ends up getting called by his opponent. This clearly demonstrates that his strategy here is not a bet fold, he is committed to the hand. Furthermore, it is important to note that he will consistently utilize this large pot-sized betting sizing on this particular board structure to maximize pressure and value. He carefully balances his range by including strong nut flush draws that have an ace high, and it is highly probable that he is also playing sets of aces without a flush draw as well. Wouldn't you agree that this is a likely part of his strategy? He balances both ways and bets anyway. In this specific spot, we really want to force some folds. And it's the same thing. Again, it's the same situation. The SPR is high. SPR is 8 against a fish. I honestly don't know. But against a fish, I suppose it actually makes quite a bit of sense to make this kind of bet. But usually, it's standard to bet 50% so that weaker flush draws can call. Here's the opposite situation I was talking about. Here, our range is the c-bet frequency should be, I don't know, probably around 10%. Very small. The board doesn't suit our range. Let's take a look just out of curiosity. 4-3-2 flush draw. The frequency is 9%, and the bet is with a small sizing 33 to 50%. Here it's calculated at 33. And so, once again, we all find ourselves in a rather difficult and uncomfortable situation after making a call here. None of us really have a clear idea of how to proceed next. Should we try to bluff? Since we got called, we should just remain composed and simply choose to check to see what happens. You can even consider playing check call. In fact, you definitely should play check call with a hand like ace-queen, 4. Let's see, I decide to check, the opponent puts a bet into the pot, and we all follow through and play check call. And sometimes it even plays check raise with hearts, maybe with some straights, with ace-5, but otherwise it just calmly plays check call. Here, this hand is most likely also played from a check. But I play from a check. SB versus UTG. So we ask the question, what will it answer us? What can respond to this sizing? Hands that have less equity. Unlikely. The only hand is some kind of flush draw. Everything else responds here. A pair, an open-ended straight draw, 2 pair, a straight. When looking at this specific bet sizing, we are analyzing a situation involving a jack and a 9 offsuit going up against a 7 and a 6, which creates a very interesting dynamic for the players involved in this particular hand. 5. All of these he generally plays from a check, and the flop itself The board structure is played more from a check, 80% check, 20% bet, something like that. These are the kinds of mistakes that also eat up a significant part of his game, so it's worth paying attention to these mistakes. Good luck at the tables.